In Canton, Ohio, there is a bronze bust of a man who changed the game of football more than any single player in history. Offensive coordinators redesigned their schemes because of him. A position that barely existed before he played it became the most feared weapon in the sport because of him. In the state of Florida, that same man's name sits on a sex offender registry. Both of those facts are true. Neither one cancels the other. His name is Lawrence Taylor. And the distance between his greatness and his depravity is the darkest story the NFL has ever tried not to tell. Number 1. The Shipyard kid who didn't care about football. Lawrence Julius Taylor was born on February 4, 1959, in Williamsburg, Virginia, a town better known for colonial history than for producing athletes. His father, Clarence, worked at the Newport News shipbuilding yards, rising before dawn and coming home smelling like welding flux and salt water. His mother, Iris, kept the house and kept her 3 boys in line. The Taylors weren't poor, but they weren't comfortable either. Clarence believed in work, discipline, and not making excuses. Here's the part that even die-hard football fans don't know. Lawrence Taylor didn't play organized football until his junior year of high school. Not his freshman year, not his sophomore year, his junior year. The most devastating defensive player in the history of the sport spent the first 16 years of his life barely thinking about the game. He played baseball, he ran track. Football was just something other kids did on Friday nights. When he finally tried out for the Lafayette High School team, the coaches saw a raw, rangy kid with elite speed and absolutely no technique. What they also saw, and what would define Taylor's entire life, was a capacity for violence on the field that went beyond aggression. It was something closer to joy. He didn't just tackle ball carriers, he hunted them. The instinct was there before anyone taught him a single thing about the position. By his senior season, Taylor was good enough to attract some college attention, but he wasn't a blue-chip recruit. He wasn't on any magazine covers. The big Southern football factories, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, didn't come knocking with scholarship offers and promises. The kid from the shipyard town would have to prove himself somewhere else. Number 2. Chapel Hill and the birth of a monster. The University of North Carolina was not a football powerhouse. It was a basketball school in a basketball state, and when Lawrence Taylor arrived in Chapel Hill in 1977, nobody on that campus expected him to become the most terrifying player in college football. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Taylor played defensive end as a freshman, and while the athleticism was obvious, the rawness was just as evident. He took bad angles. He got washed out of plays by offensive linemen who knew technique he hadn't yet learned. But what the coaches noticed, what set their hair on end, was what happened when Taylor did get to the quarterback. The collision wasn't normal. It was something closer to a car accident. Players who blocked him described the sensation of trying to stop something that couldn't be redirected, only endured. By his junior and senior seasons, Taylor had moved to outside linebacker, and the results were catastrophic for every offense on the schedule. He recorded a combined total that defied the position. Double-digit sacks in an era when sacks weren't even an official statistic yet. He was named first-team All-American. NFL scouts who came to Chapel Hill to evaluate other players left talking about only one man. Bill Parcells, then an assistant coach with the Giants, watched Taylor's film and later said it was the only time in his career that tape made him genuinely uneasy. Not excited, uneasy. Because what he saw on that film wasn't just a good football player, it was a force that the professional game hadn't accounted for. A linebacker with the speed of a defensive back, the strength of a defensive end, and an instinct for destruction that couldn't be diagrammed or predicted. The 1981 NFL Draft was approaching, and the New York Giants, losers of more games than anyone wanted to count, held the second pick. Number 3, 56, and the end of losing. On draft day in April 1981, the New Orleans Saints selected running back George Rogers with the first overall pick. Rogers would have a decent career. He would not change football. The Giants took Lawrence Taylor at number 2, and within weeks, the entire trajectory of a franchise reversed direction. Taylor's impact was immediate and almost incomprehensible. As a rookie, he recorded 9.5 sacks and was named Defensive Rookie of the Year. But the statistics were the least interesting part. What defied understanding was how a single player on defense, a position group that operates as a unit, not as a collection of individuals, could alter the outcome of games through sheer force of will. Quarterbacks who had never flinched began rushing throws. Offensive linemen who had dominated for years suddenly looked helpless. Running plays that should have gone to the left side of the field were redesigned to go right, away from Taylor's side. Not because the play was better, but because coaches were afraid of what would happen if a running back crossed his path. The Giants had been one of the worst franchises in football. In the decade before Taylor arrived, they'd made the playoffs once. With him, they became a defense-first powerhouse almost overnight. Head coach Ray Perkins, and then Bill Parcells, built their entire philosophy around the simple premise that Lawrence Taylor would create chaos, and everyone else would clean up the wreckage. Taylor wore number 56. Within a year, it was the most feared number in professional football. Opposing coaches game planned for him the way they game planned for entire defensive units. One man commanding the attention that usually required 11. But Taylor wasn't just dominating the NFL. He was doing something far more radical. He was rewriting it. Number 4, the man who redesigned the game. Before Lawrence Taylor, the outside linebacker position in professional football was primarily a coverage role. You dropped into zones. You read the quarterback's eyes. You occasionally rushed the passer on a blitz. The position required intelligence, discipline, and good instincts. It did not require the ability to physically overwhelm an offensive tackle and arrive at the quarterback like a missile fired from the edge of the formation. Taylor changed that, permanently. By his second and third seasons, offensive coordinators across the league were confronting a problem they had never faced. A defender who lined up on the outside and rushed the passer with such speed, power, and relentless violence that no single blocker could stop him. Traditional blocking schemes collapsed. Tight ends who were asked to chip him got thrown aside. Running backs who stayed in to pass protect were flattened. The NFL's response was the most significant schematic shift in the modern history of the sport. Teams began drafting enormous, athletic left tackles, the position that lined up across from Taylor, with first-round picks and paying them like franchise quarterbacks. Before Taylor, the left tackle was an anonymous position filled by competent but unremarkable players. After Taylor, it became one of the most valued positions on the field, because the left tackle's job was now singular and desperate: keep number 56 away from the quarterback at all costs. Bill Walsh, the genius behind the San Francisco 49ers dynasty, redesigned his passing game, partly in response to Taylor, quick, short throws that got the ball out before Taylor could arrive. Joe Montana later admitted that Taylor was the only defender who genuinely made him afraid. Not nervous, not cautious, afraid. One man forced an entire sport to reimagine how offense was played. No defensive player before or since has ever held that kind of power over the game itself. But on a Monday night in November 1985, Taylor's capacity for destruction would produce a moment so violent that 40 years later, Americans who don't even watch football still know what happened. Number 5, 37 seconds on Monday night, November 18, 1985, RFK Stadium, Washington, D.C. Monday Night Football, the biggest stage the regular season has to offer. The New York Giants against the Washington Redskins. A national audience watching on ABC. On a routine flea flicker play in the second quarter, Redskins quarterback Joe Theismann took the ball, turned to throw, and never saw Lawrence Taylor coming. Taylor hit him from the blind side. A clean play, a textbook sack, the kind of collision that happened a dozen times every Sunday across the league. But the angle, the torque, and the force combined to produce something that made the camera operators look away. Theismann's right leg snapped between the knee and the ankle, a compound fracture so severe that the bone broke through the skin on live television. The sound was audible on the broadcast. Players on both sidelines recoiled. Frank Gifford, calling the game from the booth, went momentarily silent, and then something happened that revealed a side of Lawrence Taylor the public rarely saw. He didn't celebrate, he didn't walk away. He immediately turned to the Redskins sideline and began waving frantically for the medical staff, his face contorted in genuine distress. Players who were on the field that night later said Taylor looked like he might be sick. The man who had built his career on controlled violence was confronted, in that moment, with what violence actually does to a human body. Theismann never played another snap in the NFL. The play became one of the most replayed moments in television sports history. For millions of viewers, it was the first time they truly understood what the men inside those helmets were risking every time they stepped between the lines. Taylor and Theismann developed an unlikely bond in the years that followed, appearing together at events, connected forever by 37 seconds on a Monday night that neither of them could undo. But in 1985, Lawrence Taylor didn't have time to process what had happened. He was in the middle of assembling the most dominant defensive season the sport had ever seen. Number 6, the last defender to own the game. The 1986 season was Lawrence Taylor's masterpiece, and it may never be matched. 20.5 sacks, a number that, by itself, would have been remarkable for a defensive end, the position specifically designed to rush the passer. For a linebacker, a player who also had to drop into coverage, stop the run, and read offensive formations before the snap, it was something approaching impossible. Taylor was named the NFL's most valuable player by unanimous vote. Not Defensive Player of the Year, not Best Defensive Player, Most Valuable Player, the award that almost always goes to a quarterback or a running back, because those positions touch the ball and put points on the board. Taylor won it without ever taking a snap on offense. No defensive player has won it since. That was 40 years ago. The Giants rode that defense, Taylor's defense, to Super Bowl 21 in January 1987, where they dismantled the Denver Broncos 39-20. Taylor spent the game terrorizing John Elway, the young Broncos quarterback who would become one of the greatest to ever play. Elway had no answer. Nobody did. 4 years later, Taylor was back in the Super Bowl, this time against the Buffalo Bills in Super Bowl 25, the game remembered for Scott Norwood's missed field goal that sailed wide right in the final seconds. What's less remembered is that the Giants' defensive game plan, built around Taylor and a suffocating scheme, held the Bills' high-powered offense to 19 points. Taylor was 31 years old in that game. His body was breaking down, his knees ached, his back screamed after every practice. But there was something else breaking down that nobody in the press box or the stands could see, something Lawrence Taylor had been hiding for years, and it was eating him alive from the inside. Number 7, the white lines behind the white lines. The cocaine started early. By Taylor's own account, in his autobiography, in interviews, in a 60-minute segment that stunned the country, he was using during the 1982 season, his second year in the league. The greatest defensive player in football was getting high and then going out on Sundays and destroying offensive game plans with a chemical racing through his bloodstream. The stories, mostly self-reported and never independently verified at the granular level, are staggering. Taylor described playing in games while high. He described nights that started in Manhattan nightclubs and ended in crack houses. He described a routine so brazen that he once sent another person to take an NFL drug test in his place, a scheme that apparently worked, at least for a time. In 1988, the league finally caught up. Taylor was suspended for the first 4 games of the season for violating the NFL's substance abuse policy. It should have been a wake-up call. For a brief period it was. He came back, played well, and the football world exhaled. But the addiction didn't go anywhere. It just went underground. Bill Parcells, the coach who had built his entire defense around Taylor's genius, spent years trying to manage what he could not control. Parcells later spoke about the helplessness of watching the most talented player he'd ever coached self-destruct in slow motion, calling him at night to make sure he was home, sending assistant coaches to check on him, doing everything short of locking him in a room. Teammates knew, the organization knew, the league knew. And for years, the response was to look the other way because Lawrence Taylor on cocaine was still better than almost any linebacker in football sober. That calculation, talent excusing everything, wins purchasing silence, would define not just Taylor's career, but the NFL's relationship with its most troubled stars for decades to come. And when the football finally stopped, there was nothing left to excuse. Number 8, the man without the helmet. Lawrence Taylor played his final NFL game in January 1994. He was 34 years old, his body held together by tape, cortisone, and stubbornness. He finished with 132.5 career sacks, 10 Pro Bowl selections, 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards, 2 Super Bowl rings, and a unanimous MVP trophy, On paper, the retirement of a legend. What followed was something closer to free fall. Without the structure of football, the practices, the film sessions, the Sunday rituals that had organized his life since Chapel Hill, Taylor had nothing between himself and his worst impulses. The cocaine use escalated. The arrests began. He was arrested for attempting to purchase crack cocaine in 1996. He failed to appear for a court date and was briefly a fugitive. The IRS came after him for unpaid taxes. The money, millions earned over a 13-year career, was largely gone. In 1999, Taylor was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. The ceremony should have been a victory lap, a celebration of a career that had literally reshaped the sport. Instead, it was shadowed by the reality of what Taylor had become. A man who stood at the podium in a gold jacket and spoke about greatness while his life outside that building was in ruins. He attempted comebacks of various kinds: a brief, embarrassing stint in professional wrestling, an appearance on a reality television show about addiction, moments that traded on his name while diminishing what the name once meant. His marriages fractured. His relationships with his children strained under the weight of broken promises and missed years. The people closest to him watched a man who had once been the most disciplined athlete on any football field prove incapable of applying that discipline to a single aspect of his life off it. And then, in the spring of 2010, the phone call that transformed Lawrence Taylor from a cautionary tale into something far worse. Number 9, Room 136. On May 6, 2010, police arrested Lawrence Taylor at a Holiday Inn in Montebello, New York. The charge was third-degree rape. The victim was a 16-year-old girl. According to court records, the girl had been brought to the hotel by a man who was later convicted of sex trafficking. Taylor, who was 51 years old, paid $300. He would later claim he believed the girl was 19. The evidence presented during the legal proceedings told a different story. The girl had visible injuries when police found her. Taylor pleaded guilty to sexual misconduct, a misdemeanor, and patronizing a prostitute. The original felony rape charge was reduced as part of the plea agreement. He was sentenced to 6 years of probation and was required to register as a sex offender. He served no prison time. The reaction from the football world was a study in discomfort. Some former teammates expressed sympathy for a man they said had been struggling with addiction and mental health issues for decades. Others simply went silent. The Giants organization, which had retired his number 56 and celebrated his legacy for years, said nothing publicly. The Hall of Fame took no action. There is no mechanism for removing an inductee, and the institution has never revoked a bust. What was lost in the legal maneuvering and the headlines was something that should never be minimized. A teenage girl was harmed. The plea deal, the reduced charges, the probation sentence, the absence of prison time, all of it was filtered through the lens of Taylor's fame and resources. The outcome reflected the justice available to a man with a famous name and expensive lawyers. Whether it reflected actual justice is a question the system never adequately answered. Lawrence Taylor's name remained on the Hall of Fame wall in Canton. It also remained on a sex offender registry in the state of Florida. And that duality, the bronze bust and the database entry existing simultaneously, became the defining fact of his legacy. Number 10, the bust and the registry. In Canton, Ohio, Lawrence Taylor's bronze likeness stares out from a shelf alongside the greatest players who ever lived. The plaque beneath it describes a career of unprecedented dominance. The sacks, the Super Bowls, the MVP season that no defensive player has matched in 4 decades. Tour groups stop in front of it. Fathers point it out to their sons. The bust captures the jaw, the intensity, the certainty of a man who stepped onto a football field knowing he was the most dangerous person on it. In Florida, in a database maintained by the state's Department of Law Enforcement, Lawrence Taylor's name appears alongside a photograph, a home address, and the details of his conviction. He is required to verify his registration periodically. He will be on that list for the rest of his life. The easy thing would be to choose one version, to say the football erases the crime, or the crime erases the football. Fans have tried both, and neither holds. The man who forced an entire sport to redesign itself, who made the left tackle position valuable, who caused Joe Montana, the coolest quarterback who ever played, to admit fear, is the same man who paid $300 in a Holiday Inn room with a 16-year-old trafficking victim. The genius and the monster share the same body, the same name, the same number 56 that Giants fans still wear on Sundays without thinking about what else that name carries. There is no resolution to the Lawrence Taylor story. There is no redemption arc in the third act, no quiet scene where he makes amends and the audience exhales. There is only the distance, the vast, unbridgeable distance between a bronze bust in Canton and a name on a registry in Florida, between the greatest defensive player who ever lived and the worst thing he ever did. They retired his number, they built his bust, they put his name on a list, and the game he changed, the game that celebrated his violence, enabled his addiction, and looked away until it couldn't, has never figured out what to do with the truth that all of those things are about the same man. If Lawrence Taylor's story made you think, consider subscribing. We tell the stories the game would rather forget. And tell us in the comments, should the Hall of Fame have a way to address what happens after the last game is played?